provides versus what would be a hodgepodge government, if at all it is the India alliance?
Absolutely, Preeti. And look, this has been the Prime Minister's USP, particularly in the last 5 years. In 2014, he came to power promising Achhe Din. That could be seen more as a vote against the UPA government at the time. In 2019, he spoke of a strong, robust nationalism. Today, he's speaking about a strong, robust nationalism, but contrasting it with what he claims is the government of the Majboor, a Majboor Sarkar, a government of compulsion, of coalition compulsions, contrasting his government effectively with what the India alliance may have to offer. And this is a template that the opposition has not been able to challenge yet. The fact is, because the opposition has not been able to get its act together, the Prime Minister's claim that he alone can provide this kind of stable leadership stands out. And therefore, he's focusing on what is his big asset, this image of a populist, muscular, nationalist leader who's promising stability, offering the dream of a Amrit Kal in 2047, versus an opposition that seems to be coming together at the moment on a single plank of anti-Modism. So the moment you contrast the two, the Prime Minister comes across very strong and an effective leader. So I think he's focusing on his strengths and almost asking you, don't look at my weaknesses. I haven't fulfilled all my promises, but the one thing that I have fulfilled is provided you with a relatively stable leadership over the last 10 years.
You know, there's a point in that, Manikam Tagore, if you look at it, whether you like it, whether you dislike it, whichever way one might want to view it, there's a clear vision, narrative, and that has been laid out in this interview as well, where the Prime Minister, if you look at the narrative, Manikam Tagore, firmly there is a Prime Minister face which is there, which is the Prime Minister himself. On the other hand, you have the Viksit Sankalp Yatra, where he talks about, which ties into the La Bharati section, which we're going to talk a little later about. Even if it be the Ram Mandir, all of that in totality, where it contrasts to your own on what you have to offer of the India alliance, it just doesn't match up, and you can see that.
Thank you. This is like the India shining story. It is coming to that level because everything is shining for them from the race course road. But the reality is bleak, and the unemployment rate, all things are in different level. And we need to understand that Mr. Modi as a Prime Minister can keep on saying about the Milli-Juli Sarkar, as the terms he has been using in India today. India's parliamentary democracy means conversation. Cabinet form of government has been for 70 years. It has not been authoritarian. He has changed it for 9 years. Is one man's decision, or two men sit together and decides everything. Therefore, the decision-making power of the cabinet has gone. It's only one man and the other man decides. Both of them, one man decides and second man executes. This autocratic functioning is dangerous for India. That is our narrative. We are saying that 146 MPs has been thrown out of the parliament.
Right. But Manikam Tagore, you know what you talk about.
Have been passed, but there is no conversation about
what
it.
You talk about dictatorial, he's turned it around, and for him, it's the Modi hai to mumkin hai moment. And that is what people are actually buying into.
People are not buying. People in 2024, when they line up to vote, you will see it, because he, as Prime Minister, is speaking about only the 50% vote. He is not worried about the 100% vote. 100% Indians. He is speaking about to get 50% vote is his idea. Therefore, he speaks to his audience, his voters. That is his idea.
Okay.
But
Swapan Das Gupta,
India Alliance is going to speak to people.
Well, at least in the Hindi heartland, and very recently, a month ago, Manikam Tagore, it didn't quite work out the way you thought it would. But Swapan Das Gupta, the Prime Minister speaking of his vision for 2024, where somewhere down the line, other than the fact that how his government provides stability while the Milli-Juli Sarkar is just a motley crew of political parties or a hodgepodge government, even if it ever does come to power. But ultimately, if you look at this interview, Swapan Das Gupta, audacious is not a bad word, but he seems to think that it's a done deal. He's speaking of what he plans to do in the next 5 years, 10 years.
Priti, if you look very carefully at the interview, I think Raj was very right in pointing out that basically it spells out the approach which he's going to take for the next election. And in that, what comes across is, of course, there is that negative dimension, which is the lament about India's 30 wasted years, the Mili Juli Sarkar and all that. But outside that, what you find is a complete narrative about the achievements of this government, and he's tried to link the achievements of this government with an approach which he adopted right from the time of his tenure in Gujarat. And what he's trying to say is that, look, we've achieved so much, we've taken the country towards the path of development, the developed nation, Viksit Bharat. We've taken it to the path of greatness, and now it's the job of the electorate. And we are approaching the electorate to say that we'll give it another chance to take it across. And I think that's really what it is. It's a position of consolidation of the gains which have been there for the past 10 years. And therefore, this is an achievement card, a performance card, coupled with a promise. So I think you've got to look upon it in that way. Now, of course, there are others who might say that, look, he's not focused on this. The real issue is the question of his leadership style, etc. Now, all those narratives are likely to come during the election time. I mean, that's what elections are for, where you have competitive narratives. But I think as far as understanding the mind of the Prime Minister is concerned, I think this interview does very well in telling us this is what to expect in the next 4 months of campaigning.
All right, and one of those narratives which would be built as a strong BJP pitch in the next 4 months of campaigning will be the Viksit Bharat mission. And let's quickly now cut across to what the Prime Minister had to say on that. The Prime Minister explained in detail in this interview why he thinks the $5 trillion economy target is realistic. Our track record speaks for itself, he says, and I quote, "When I became Chief Minister of Gujarat in 2001, the size of its economy was around 26 billion, rupees 2.17 lakh crores. When I left Gujarat to become the Prime Minister of the country, the size of Gujarat's economy had become 133.5 billion, which is about 11.1 lakh crores. And as a result of the various policies and reforms today, Gujarat's economy is around 260 billion, which is 21.6 lakh crores. Similarly, when I became Prime Minister in 2014, the size of India's economy was 2 trillion, rupees 167 lakh crore. And at the end of 2023-24, India's GDP will be more than 3.75 trillion, which is rupees 312 lakh crore. It is this track record of 23 years which shows this is a realistic target. Raj, to bring you in on this, to draw comparisons to Gujarat, somewhere down the line, it's also, trust me, there's a trust factor. It will happen.
Yeah, I think he's playing to his strengths. Tell me which other leader has been both a chief minister and a prime minister and is now serving for 23 years. The only other person who is possibly doing that is Naveen Babu, Naveen Patnaik in Odisha, but he's only been a chief minister. He's never been prime minister. So he is contrasting that and saying, look, I am the leader. I've delivered in the past and I will deliver again. And you'd mentioned Viksit Bharat. This is a question that we asked him because there is a sort of a vague notion about what Viksit Bharat is all about, right? It sounds great that we should be a developed country by 2047. In fact, I did ask him that the common definition of a developed country is that per capita income should be $20,000. We are $2,000 at the moment. Second is that you must have a world-class infrastructure. We are building towards that. And third, of course, is governance and democratic institutions. This is the broad definition. But he was very clear and he said, look, that's only part of it. There are, 100 more characteristics of a developed country. And then he outlined 3 things that he was doing. He's not being vague in this. He said, first, you need skill development and a complete mindset change among our youth to work out from, create opportunities out of problems. And that's what the new education policy is working towards. And the second thing he emphasized was that he was going to focus on small and medium-sized businesses and saying that he's going to enable them to develop into a larger units, and that was going to be one of the key thrust areas. And the third, he said, was a complete revamp of the investment and financial markets. So he is not being vague. When he's talking about growth, he might be putting a target of 2047, might be putting a target of $5 trillion and becoming the the third largest economy. But he says these are the nuts and bolts that I'm going to work on, and I've not got just three, but I've got 10 or 12 different plans that's happening. And by the way, Preeti, which I've mentioned in my article that's there, which sort of explains why India Today magazine decided that Mr. Modi would be the newsmaker of the year. He has put together, they asked the Niti Aayog to put together the entire 2047 or Viksit Bharat plan. 10 secretarial groups have been formed, and they will present to him, possibly in the new year, the first week of the new year, as to what is their whole deliberation. So he is not leaving this in a very woolly sort of way, just promising a pie in the sky. He is very clear that he's taking the direction. And then coming back to what Shravan said, this is the second point. I have a plan. And he's asking the opposition, do you have anything more than just Parivarwad and your hate for Mr. Modi?
Pawan Verma, to bring you in on this, it's interesting because, when we talk about the economy, where he lays down his vision for the $5 trillion economy, which has been hotly debated in many television studios, he does somewhere down the line also give a plan of action to that.
Undoubtedly, the Prime Minister has a vision for the country, and he plans long term, plans in meticulous detail, and he has declared that his goal is for India to become a developed country by 1947, which is a laudable target. But Preeti, if I may, for just 30 seconds, since you ignored me on that first question,
apologies, sir.
I want to say
Go ahead, sir.
that Prime Minister Modi's personal popularity is high for several reasons, including his hard work and eloquence. But I think partly it's also because we have had one of the most dismal, divided, fractious and ineffective politicians on a pan-India scale. And it is true that there is a new level of authoritarianism within the BJP. But when Mr. Manikam Tagore talks about the writ of 1.5 people or 2 people in the BJP as supreme, I want to ask him, what's the position in the Congress? Who decides? We all know that it is the Gandhi family, and in specific terms, Mr. Rahul Gandhi does that. So even though he occupies no post either at the organizational level or in Parliament, and that is where the Prime Minister's attack on dynastic parties and the lack of inner party democracy in them hits a bullseye. And that is the truth. We have rarely seen an opposition which over 10 years has not been able to build a credible and convincing narrative which touches the people and speaks about their lives and the problems they face in an electorally efficient manner. So it's time to admit that. And it is also time to recognize that Prime Minister Modi's popularity has something to do with that. As regards your second question, yes, India must aim to become a developed country, but I think we need to understand the full nuances of that. Raj referred to per capita factors. I am also concerned sometimes that although our achievements have been many, and I can list them for the Prime Minister, although he's done that in India Today's interview, I think there are issues of India being able to utilize its demographic dividend of the young, because many of those whom we produce from our educational universities and colleges, if they get the chance to go there, are unemployable. And the fact of the matter is that we may be one of the youngest nations in the world if we don't produce a skilled enough force to be employed, and if there are not enough jobs for them. if the manufacturing sector has not grown and agriculture is moribund at 16% of the GDP of the economy, we have a big problem. So I think that the level of inequality in India today, where the gap between the rich and the poor has widened to such a level, is something that must be factored into an otherwise laudable goal of making India a developed country.
All right. I'm going to move on from what you just touched upon, when you began your opening remarks, sir, which is where you spoke of the Modi factor. Well, when we asked the Prime Minister, what is the Modi guarantee, which has been once again debated many a times over, especially after the Hindi heartland states, which had Prime Minister on the ticket and all going to the BJP. This is how the Prime Minister defined the Modi guarantee. Well, only someone who has experienced a life of poverty, and I quote the Prime Minister here, understands that the greatest force propelling a poor person forward is life, is their trust, their hope. This faith of the poor is what keeps me going. Modi will put in his all, but will not let the trust of his poor brothers and sisters break. Modi's guarantee is not a formula made for winning elections. Modi's guarantee is the trust of the poor. Today, every poor person in the country knows that Modi will not back down from his duty. Today, every poor person is aware of how political parties in the past have broken their trust. But they also know that Modi's guarantees can be trusted. This trust of the poor also gives me my energy, even if I completely exhaust myself or push myself over my limits. I will not let this trust be violated. And Rajdeep, this is when the trust factor that comes in, where Modi is on the ticket, invariably there's a sense of trust that this man will deliver.
Look, the word trust has been used half a dozen times. And if there is one word that symbolizes Mr. Modi's connect with a large number of people, it's the word trust. I think over time, both in Gujarat and now at the center, Mr. Modi has been able to build a certain connect with his voters based on this concept of Vishwas or trust. If you remember in the last election, there was a ditty, Modi hai to mumkin hai. If Mr. Modi is there, anything is possible. Now you're taking it from there to Modi ki guarantee. And he's personalizing it. Look, he is in that sense a populist strongman who's saying, look, forget about my party, vote for me. It's about the personality of Mr. Modi and the trust that he's been able to build over the last 2 decades in power, both in Gujarat and in India, which he's looking as his big USP. That again is to be contrasted with the opposition, but at the end of the day is headed by leaders who perhaps do not even have a fraction of that experience in public life. And that makes a huge difference. Look, Mr. Modi is determined, it appears, to make 2024 once again a leadership contest. The opposition wants to make it about constitutional issues. Look at the manner in which MPs are suspended. Look at the manner in which institutions have been compromised. Look at authoritarian rule. He's saying, forget all that. Have faith in me. I'm someone who's come from the grassroots, has been in public life for 50 years. Therefore, have faith in me. And then goes on to say, in a subsequent quote in that interview, nation first. So he's, in a way, once again it's the Modi playbook. He did it in 2019. He wants to do it in 2024. I don't see any major difference in the politics and the political playbook of 2019 and 24. This is personality politics of a strongman leader who's saying, have trust in me above all else.
Manikam Tagore, let me spin this around for you. You and your party were the ones who bought in the guarantee card. You fought the Karnataka elections on the Congress guarantee. And now, the way the Prime Minister and the BJP has spun it around, it's about Modi's guarantee. The trust factor lying more with Modi's guarantee.
We know that Mr. Modi is using the word Modi guarantee again and again for the past 1 month, and we know that Congress guarantees has worked in the ground, and people has connected with the guarantee in a very big way, and therefore he's saying about his achievements as guarantees, whatever he has called it as achievements. But one thing is very clear, that Mr. Rajdeep was saying about the India Alliance leadership, and India Alliance leadership has great potential leaders, and it's a cabinet form of government. We are still in government, cabinet form of government. We are not in a presidential form of government. And Mr. Modi is always believes that he is the only man who can solve everybody's problem, and that's not working here. And poverty is increasing. The rich poor divide has increased in a big way. 5% of Indians controls 60% of the wealth, and bottom 50% of the people controls only 5% of the whole wealth itself. India is becoming into a different country than in 10 years before. And he is saying about Mili Juli Sarkar for 30 years, which include Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government also. He is blaming that government also, which every BJP person thought that it's a democratic and a cabinet formed by Atal Bihari Vajpayee. The government of Mr. Modi is going towards an end that they only want to win elections, and for that they can take everybody's name and take everybody's words also. Even guarantee has been stolen from Congress.
But the fact is the same guarantee which you said is stolen from the Congress, Manikam Tagore, worked very well for the BJP in the 3 states in the Hindi heartland. It was Modi's guarantee. But I just want to cut across to Raj back, and Raj, taking off from what Rajdeep said, that 2024 is clearly going to be a personality contest, because the Prime Minister spoke very clearly on what his vision is, the Modi guarantee, and where the chemistry is concerned, the arithmetic of the India alliance aside, the chemistry lies with Modi.
Priti, I think Manikam Tagore has a point. It was the Congress that coined this whole business of guarantees. Let's also then see how cleverly Mr. Modi has taken that and made it his own. And why is he doing that? Because he knows, let's not forget there was this huge battle which Ms. Modi initiated versus what he called the Revdi culture and welfare measures. Now, Mr. Modi, if you look at his record, and this is not playing by the playbook, as Rajdeep could be saying, though I agree with some of the points that Rajdeep made, is that his track record, if you look at his first term, he had built toilets, he had built housing, he had, in terms of the other factors, roads, everything that had to do with including farmers. He's built a whole set of welfare programs, which we have now popularly called the Labharitis who benefited. That included, free gas connections and everything else. What does he do in his second term? He actually, launches this huge program for drinking water, tap drinking water, called the Har Ghar Jal program. One of the largest, where you had only 16% of the population having tap water supply, drinking water supply. And today, within 4 or 5 years after he made that announcement on Independence Day, there are 76% of the households in India that have it. So what he is contrasting is that the guarantees that, I think in some senses, the BJP was shaken by what happened in Karnataka as well as in Telangana. And their reaction, and this is the counter that Mr. Modi gives, and quite, convincing as well, because he has this track record where he has, in fact, been seen as the messiah of the poor, has delivered extensively, coined this very neat way of saying the Modi guarantee. And if you notice, his thing is about the poor, the needy, and building their trust on this factor. So he's really appealing to that section of society, which is very large. Let's not also forget that though the economy is growing at the rate it is doing, one of the fastest growing in the world, probably the fastest at the moment if you look at major economies, there is, economists talk about K-shaped growth. And certainly that K-shape means that the rich are getting richer, or the middle class are getting richer, and the poor their lot is not improved. And the fact is that since these guarantees come out and does have traction in my home state, Karnataka, and we saw in Telangana, there is some problem that is there that needs to be addressed, which he needs to do as well. The fact is that the economy might be booming. There might be other, stocks could be doing, but there is a nation that has been hit hard by COVID and needs to recover. He is covering his flanks in many senses by this Modi guarantee and saying, I will give you more. I've delivered these many welfare projects. I will do it, when I come back to power in 2024 as well.
Swapan Dasgupta, there's a point that Manikam Tagore also raised, that this is about one person, not the party. And, later on in the interview, he's also spoken of, the election of three chief ministers out of nowhere in the Hindi heartland, what we saw recently, and how it's a process where the BJP is concerned and cannot happen in the Congress. But it once again does point out to the high command culture, the centralization of power.
Well, look, if you really look at the election, it's undeniable that elections are getting more and more presidential under Mr. Modi. And that's partly because Mr. Modi has now acquired the necessary credibility to make it so. You know, when you point out that India is a different place, Mr. Tagore pointed that out. He said India is a very different place today. He's right. In the past 10 years, India, the actual face of India has been transformed by the actions of the Modi government. And he's pointing out the various shortcomings of this Modi government, inequality, etc., etc. Now, they might exist on a macro academic level, but the point is, most people who vote, and when asked the question, are you better off today than you were 5 or 10 years ago? Their answer is an unequivocal yes. We are better off. Our lives are changing. Our lives have changed. And it is for that reason that they repose the faith in Mr. Modi. Now, as far as the experiments with the relatively inexperienced chief ministers are concerned, I think the answer to that is that in many cases it succeeded, in many cases it may not succeed. And as far as Mr. Modi is concerned, he's looking upon himself as a case study. I remember when Mr. Modi was catapulted to the chief ministership in 2002, in 2001, most people said, but this man has not even ever contested for a municipal election. And there are so many stalwarts there. But you see, it's the approach, it's the aptitude, and it's the opportunity which BJP workers all along the line feel that they are getting under Modi, which explains why there is a fierce sense of loyalty, apart from the fact that Mr. Modi is the big vote catcher. So the answer to all these things is that yes, Mr. Modi has changed the nature of Indian politics. He's changed it. You may like it, you may dislike it. But there is a difference thing in Indian politics. And I still think it's in a process of evolution. But for the moment, it's Modi who is occupying center stage of that change.
Well, you're right. There's no denial of that. Mr. Pawan Verma, before you accuse me of not coming to you, would you want to add to that, sir?
No, I think that right now, Mr. Modi enjoys a popularity and trust, not only for his own achievements, because no government is entirely bad or entirely good, but there are some very tangible achievements of this present government. But also, as I have mentioned, and I will maintain this, for the lack of a charismatic face and an opposition which has a narrative and electoral organizational strength, which the BJP has in great measure. I would advise, for whatever it matters, that in future, when we look at a developed country and Mr. Modi's guarantee to give it to us, we really must look also at the underbelly of India. Preeti, I think the government needs to concentrate much more on education and health. Now, I'm not going to get into statistical debates, but you are witness and you travel this country for length and breadth. The state of primary education at the level of the countryside is in shambles, and we don't provide enough in our budget or come up with schemes to upgrade our educational system, which is the incubator, which is the nursery to provide the talent, ultimately to man a developed India. Similarly, on health, I think India must rank as amongst the countries with the lowest allocation to health. And if Mr. Modi is moving towards a developed India, and I said that's laudable, I think these are areas which should be looked at instead of painting a completely one-sided narrative that Modi hai to mumkin hai. Mumkin hai, but this must include all of this as well.
You know, there are two things with, taking off from what Verma said, that the government has very often faced criticism from not just the opposition, but many political and other analysts as well, over the issue of price rise and job creation. Now, when we posed the question, the Prime Minister rebutted the criticism about the lack of jobs. Now, he says, and I quote with what he told us, it is well known that investments in infrastructure have a larger multiplier impact on growth and employment. Hence, we have constantly increased capital investment outlay. The budget of 23-24 has increased steeply to 10 lakh crores, up from 1.9 lakh crores in 2013-2014. Labour markets have witnessed falling unemployment rates, down from 5.8% in 2018-19 to 3.2% in 22-23. This has been accompanied by rising labour force participation rates, increasing from 50.2% in 2018-19 to 57.9% in 22-23. The EPFO had 277.4 million members as of March 31st, 2022, compared to 117.8 million on March 31st, 2014. Now, the Prime Minister claims his government has handled price rises better than the UPA when it came down to inflation and price rise. Now, he says, and I quote again, "Let's put allegations aside and discuss the facts. Despite 2 years of a once-in-a-century pandemic and global conflicts disrupting global value chains and even causing recessionary pressures across the world, India has shown remarkable resilience. Despite heavy odds, global crisis, supply chain breakdown, and geopolitical tensions impacting global prices of basic items, average inflation from 2014-15 to 23-24 was only 5.1% compared to 8.2% during the previous 10 years, which is higher inflation of 5.1% or 8.2%. Raj, you want to come in on weigh on this?
You know, the jury will always be out on this question because economists will throw statistics on one side saying that, look, we've brought inflation down, we've kept the jobs going. And there'll be those who will counter and say there's K-shaped growth and there are other issues that's there. I think what Mr. Modi has done is this is the opposition's crux, that, there are high prices and which he hasn't been able to contain, particularly food prices, and the fact that jobs are not easily done. He has brought out statistics to show through the periodic labor force that, look, in fact, if you see COVID devastated jobs, as we, for most of us did, there was a huge drop, but he shows that there is growth that has happened in the last 3-4 years, at least a 5 to 6%, which is very creditable. Now, other economists would argue and say that, look, if you actually deconstruct that, a lot of this is self-employed jobs, and the fact that they are unpaid jobs, meaning that these people who till their own land and everything else, that is being counted as this. But overall, if you look at the way the economy has been ticking, a 6.2% average growth rate, the fastest that is happening across the world in major economies. China is down to 4 to 5%. America's, 1.5%. The world average is 3%. The fact is India is at a sweet spot. There is a great deal of optimism, as we've seen in the stock markets. There is a lot going for Mr. Modi as he gets into his final year. And the fact that India Today magazine declares him as, the newsmaker of the year, is that he has performed in the 10th year when normally prime ministers are, their levels of credibility have dropped, as we saw with Dr. Manmohan Singh. But his popularity ratings is close to 50 to 55% in our own Mood of the Nation polls. This gives him the ballast. And let's now look at this tremendous year that he's done, that he's gone through. The economy is doing very well. He has brought in the Women's Empowerment Bill. Chandrayaan was a success. Partly, that's the scientist. But yes, it is, he had pursued it and has actually brought down a very, very good space policy that's there. Article 370, his stand has been vindicated by the Supreme Court itself. And if you take a look at internationally, he has G20. He shows that he's arrived at the world stage.
Right.
He's able to make India look as the voice of the global south, and then has a terrific meeting with Biden where the US president actually commits to selling very sensitive defense equipment to India, a new partnership that, in many senses, rivals, equals what Dr. Manmohan Singh did with the nuclear deal. So in this 1 year is action-packed, and of course, let's not forget, he also had the new parliament inaugurated, among other
Right.
things that he was doing to change the criminal laws. So here is a man in his 10th year. So what you're seeing is just not the economy. You have to take the entire thing, and that is why I think when we asked him the question about whether 2024 is a done deal, he seemed very, very confident of it, and then took a swipe at the opposition and said, we do not want a military sarkar that is there.
No, you can't be away from the truth, because if you read his interview, it talks of the next 5-6 years. He seems to be planning for that. 2014 is just a small hurdle which he thinks he's going to scale very easily. But Manikam Tagore, when you talk about inflation, because a lot, in this debate itself, you've brought it up, you've brought about, the issue of jobs. But with what the Prime Minister says. Now, he's given out figures and he's compared 2014-15 to 23-24 till November. Inflation only 5.1% compared to 8.2% during the previous 10 years of your term, which was 2004 to 2014. Now, he asks, which is higher, 5.1% or 8.2%, Manikam Tagore? Mr. Tagore, that question's for you. All right, I don't think Manikam Tagore can hear us. But, Rajdeep, with what Raj Chingappa also said, the Prime Minister Modi seeking his third term at a high where, clearly everything seems to be working for him. But when you come down to jobs, when you come down to inflation, it has been, if not the Achilles heel, but it's been the pea under the mattress for the government.
Well, I think the government has every reason to take credit, to pat itself on the back when it comes to inflation. I think in very tough circumstances, the government has managed inflation. Let's also be fair. It's not, it's very easy to compare UPA and NDA. The UPA went through very difficult times post the global financial crisis in 2008. But you could argue that the government has handled inflation reasonably well. Jobs is a big question mark. The Prime Minister has thrown some figures in the interview. You'll have others who will throw other figures at you in the interview, particularly in the informal sector. The truth of the matter is jobs is a big issue. You go across the country and you realize there is a demographic dividend that can become rapidly a demographic disaster. One of the reasons why in recent times the Prime Minister has been forced to say, look, the government will provide 10 lakh jobs is because there's a recognition that jobs is a major issue. You've got in states now, even in Maharashtra, for example, the demand for caste-based reservations recurring because there is a concern that people believe they haven't got the jobs, and they're talking about government jobs here. Forget about private jobs being created. So we can debate endlessly about, the opposition will tell you all is doom and gloom, and the Modi cheerleaders will say it's life is milk and honey. The truth lies somewhere in between. And I think this interview, in a sense, at least what the Prime Minister is doing is putting forward his claims as to why he should get re-elected. I think the challenge in a way lies for the opposition to tell us why they should vote out Mr. Modi. Indians vote out someone. And I think the failure of the
All right, okay, Rajdeep, we've lost you. We've lost that connection. But Swapan Das Gupta, taking off from what Rajdeep said and taking off from what even Mr. Pawan Verma said, has this government been able to actually leverage the demographic dividend, which could, go the other way? Because there is a lack of jobs, whichever way one might want to look at it.
It's not a question of lack of jobs. I think what has happened is that the demand for jobs is considerable. And naturally, no government can actually meet that entire demand. So yes, there is a deficit. But what this has been compensated in various ways is a mood of optimism in this country, whereby there is a feeling that with innovation, that with technology, and that with a certain amount of degree of India's exposure in the global world market, we are now somewhere in the midst of a change whereby the entire nature of what economic activity used to be is going to change. Now, that transition is still not happened. It's still work in progress in various ways. It's very interesting that the Prime Minister spoke at length about how semiconductors and AI have become priorities for the government, which again, and he spoke about how this should have actually happened 30 years ago, but it didn't. So we are now in the process of also, apart from actually doing a maintenance job of an old economy, we are creating we've laid the foundations for a new approach to the world's situation, to the economy. And I think this is really what will need to pay dividends in the future, which is what the Prime Minister's optimism is really based on. It's not based on the fact that the old manufacturing jobs are not there, that there's been a slight sluggishness in certain sectors, but the fact that there are newer opportunities which are being created. I'm afraid I must take your leave now because I've got to go.
All right,
But
okay.
thank you very much for.
Well, Mr. Dasgupta, appreciate you joining us. We've seen you here after a while, but I want to quickly cut across now to the other question on dynastic politics, or his comments on dynastic politics, which he made when we asked him about the selection of chief ministers recently at that. India Today asked about the thought process behind the selection of fresh faces as chief ministers in the recently won Hindi heartland states. The Prime Minister said, "This is not a new trend. In fact, I am the best example of this practice. Within the BJP, when I became the Chief Minister of Gujarat, I had no prior administrative experience and was not even elected to the Legislative Assembly. Yes, it may appear like a fresh trend because most of the other parties today are Parivarwadi." And then the Prime Minister explained how his party is different from others. He said, and I quote again, "Parivarwadi parties find this democratic churn difficult. The BJP has the ability to nurture multiple generations of leadership at the same time. Look at the presidents of the BJP and you will see fresh faces every few years. Ours is a cadre-based party driven by a clear mission. We all began as grassroots workers and rose through the ranks on the back of dedication and hard work. This commitment is why the nation, especially the youth, feels a strong connection with the BJP in a democracy. It is essential to provide opportunities to new generation, the new blood. This democratic churn is what makes democracies vibrant. This churn is also what makes our party vibrant and keeps aspirations and hopes burning within our Karyakartas. They feel that they too can rise in the party through their hard work. Our party is used to doing different experiments. In Gujarat, we opted for all fresh faces in ministries. In Delhi, we opted for all fresh faces in local corporation elections." Raj, this can be looked at, both ways. One, of course, especially after the three chief ministers have been picked, where every Karyakarta can harbor a dream of rising to the top. And that has been elucidated beautifully in this interview by the Prime Minister by even giving his own example and how the party works. But on the other hand, it also, which the opposition many times would want to pick on, that how this is the high command culture, the BJP, the Congressization of the BJP, if one might say.
I think he makes two very important points. And if you, there's another question that we'd asked him with regard to the fact that the BJP has no representative in the state, in the south and the east. And he got a little irritated at that point to say, look, if you really look at the entire organization, we are spread quite across and we're quite a pan-national party in that sense. But what he's trying to say in this is two things. One, pointing to the various regional parties. And if you see, many of them are dynastic in their successions, that's there. I mean, a few of them, of course, are not. But clearly, there are there is no alternative leaders as you see them, whether you see them in Tamil Nadu, whether you come to Mamata Banerjee, you don't have another leader that is there that could take place. And so he's contrasting what is happening in these various parties to what the BJP does by bringing in fresh faces.
Right.
The second point he's also making is that, and he made this point very interestingly, he said, performance versus parivarvad. You are electing me not because I come from a dynasty, not because my family heritage, not because of anything, but because I have performed. Whereas hinting at the Congress and others. All of them have come up because they had families that have pushed them up, the inheritors of a legacy. And therefore, if you look at their performance versus mine is far better. And demonstrating that, we as a party, that the BJP as a party is choosing leaders that have not been a first-time MLA as they did in Rajasthan, and yet we are willing to bring the younger people a new generation of leadership, whereas the others are effete and are decaying in their approach.
Pawan Verma, the fact is there are many ways to look at this. There is no dearth of Parivarvad or, dynastic politics where the BJP is concerned. The Karnataka opposition now being handed in, the reins to Yediyurappa's son, a prime example of that. Many names, Jyotiraditya Scindia, Anurag Thakur. But I would think the point that the Prime Minister is making is that it's not one parivar or one family which makes the final call. If you're good, you'll rise.
No, there's no doubt about it. The fact that someone in politics follows in the footsteps of a parent who is in politics is not dynastic politics. But when the child of a leader is considered the ordained leader by the accident of birth and is followed blindly because of that, that's Parivar politics. And the Prime Minister is absolutely right that it is antithetical to democracy.
Right.
And the opposition must understand this, although I will say that even in parties where the Parivarvad is not there, there is need for more democratic space.
Right.
Preeti, after all, in Parliament there's a whip. And in party forums, the scope for discussion and free debate is
Mr. Verma, I'm running out of time.
Across the political space.
I'm running out of time. 10 seconds, Rajdeep. You want to come in and weigh on
in this? In this context, I just want to add one thing.
Go ahead, sir. Make your point.
I'll just say
very quickly. I'll just say, Rajdeep, just give me a second. But I'll just say that the Prime Minister would be undoubtedly an unquestioned statesman, as he may in future become, if he had implemented more fully and towards 1947, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vishwas. Because I think India is a country where you need that healing touch.
All right, 20 seconds, Rajiv, you're going to close the show.
3 points which come through the interview, which I think are all three the strengths of the Prime Minister. One certainly comes through, which is the strongman, muscular leader who's promising stable leadership. The second point, which I don't think the interview tackled, which is the political Hindu, which will emerge more clearly in 2024 after the Ram Mandir inauguration. But that remains a big strength of the Prime Minister. And the third, which came from your last question, is Kamdar versus Namdar. The fact is, one of the big advantages that Prime Minister Modi has over his principal opponents at the moment, particularly Rahul Gandhi, is when he contrasts Kamdar versus Namdar. And I think in that sense, he has captured the zeitgeist of this aspirational India. Like him or not, he may be a polarizing figure. That, to my mind, remains a big asset that he takes to the
Rajiv, somewhere down the line befitting, because he's coming off being on the ticket on 3 elections and winning those elections handsomely at that, where the Hindi heartland is concerned. So no better choice, Raj, to have him as the newsmaker of the year. I appreciate all you 4 gentlemen for joining us. Thank you there. We're going to leave it at that. And I'm sure the debate on not just the interview, but the BJP's narrative for 2024 will continue. With that, it's a wrap. To stay with us, news and updates continue on the other side.
He recently became the most followed world leader on YouTube, a record very much in keeping with his insistence on keeping one foot on the cutting edge of whatever he does. His name on the ticket delivered the BJP's most thumping victories in the Hindi heartland, persuading even his critics that nobody is more battle-ready for the war ahead than he and his party are. He has trumped incumbency headwinds to remain high on the popularity charts after a decade. His every move is tracked obsessively by friends and foes alike. No matter where you stand on him or his politics, his arrival carves out an identity of its own. And now, with India's next national election only weeks away, a blockbuster interview in the best traditions of India today. What you're about to watch Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 60-minute interview to India Today's chairperson and editor-in-chief Arun Puri, Vice Chairperson Kali Puri, and Group Editorial Director for Publishing Raj Chengappa, where the Prime Minister speaks in the most detailed manner, openly, on a range of key domestic and international issues, apart from discussing in depth for the first time his unique management style. That's over the next 60 minutes, right here, exclusively on India Today.
Blockbuster Interview of the Year. India Today's Newsmaker for 2023. From elections to economy to AI. From Parivarvad to Modi's guarantee. Prime Minister's most detailed interview ever. The Mega Modi Interview.
We're going to split up the various things that the Prime Minister has spoken about in this 60-minute blockbuster exclusive interview into politics, his way of doing things, the economy, national security, and Modi's political style. And he, believe me, has answered questions across all of these wide-ranging topics over 60 minutes. The first question, let's dive straight into it, and then we'll try and decode what he said. The Prime Minister was asked by India Today, are you confident of scoring a hat-trick in 2024? What are the big issues that will determine the outcome of this general election? Here's what the Prime Minister said. Regarding 2024, it is not a question of my confidence. The only thing in my hands is to give my everything in the service of the people. I'm trying to do this with utmost honesty and commitment. But today there is a consensus among the people, the experts, the opinion makers, and friends from the media too, that our country doesn't need a Mili-Juli Sarkar or a hodgepodge government. We have lost 30 years due to instability resulting from Mili-Juli Sarkars. People have seen the lack of governance, the appeasement politics, corruption in the era of Mili-Juli Sarkars. This resulted in a loss of optimism and confidence among the people and gave a bad image to India in the world. So naturally, the choice of the people is the BJP. You just heard the Prime Minister use the word Mili-Juli Sarkar 3 times in that first answer as to what he sees for 2024. The next question that we asked him, what is the Modi guarantee for the 2024 election? Remember, Modi ki guarantee has become the war cry, the catchphrase for the BJP going into this next big election cycle. Here is the Prime Minister's answer to India Today. He said, for me, the guarantee is not mere words or election promises. It is the outcome of decades of my hard work. It is an expression of sensitivity towards society. When I talk about the guarantee, I bind myself to it. It doesn't let me sleep. It propels me to work harder. It leads me to give my everything for the people of the country. So please don't look for a dictionary meaning of guarantee, is how the Prime Minister has answered that question about Modi ki guarantee. What is your definition of guarantee? India Today wanted to try and nail down a definition, if there is something quantifiable here, or is this just a political, a political phrase being used in a campaign. Here's what the Prime Minister said. Only someone who has experienced a life of poverty understands that the greatest force propelling a poor person forward in life is their trust, their hope. This faith of the poor is what keeps me going. Modi will put in his all, but will not let the trust of his poor brothers and sisters break. Modi's guarantee is not a formula made for winning elections. Modi's guarantee is the trust of the poor. Today, every poor person in the country knows that Modi will not back down from his duty. Today, every poor person is aware of how political parties in the past have broken their trust, but they also know that Modi's guarantee can be trusted. This trust of the poor also gives me my energy. Even if I completely exhaust myself or push myself over my limit, I will not let this trust be violated. Okay. We're going to get some reactions in. The first tranche of questions and their answers have just come in. I'm joined now by consulting editor Rajdeep Sardesai, Siddharth Zarabi, our managing editor at Business Today, and we've got a whole lot of stuff on the economy also coming up, and Sanjay Jha, formerly of the Congress Party, who is a fervent critic of the BJP and the Prime Minister. Rajdeep, starting off with you, the Prime Minister uses the word, the phrase "Mili Juli Sarkar" 3 times in that answer when speaking about how he sees the move ahead for 2024. He also talks about how Modi ki guarantee is about trust from the poor. How do you assess the answers to those first 3 questions? The politics subheading, Rajdeep.
Shiv, I think the Prime Minister is setting the template for the 2024 elections, much as he did in 2019. He is a nationalist, populist leader, a larger-than-life figure, and he is contrasting what he believes is his leadership and stability versus what he sees as chaos and instability brought in by coalition government. So he's setting that template as his core narrative. Vote for me because I provide stable leadership. Don't vote for the others because they will provide you uncertain, chaotic leadership. That's where the word Mili Juli Sarkar comes in. From 1990 to 2014, for 25 years, India did have coalition governments. And I think the Prime Minister is trying to contrast the last 9, now 10 years with the kind of governments you had over those 25 years, where there was an element of uncertainty. Will Manmohan Singh's government complete 5 years was a question that was often asked, particularly between 2004 and 9, and you had governments falling between 96 and 99. You had 3 different governments. So the Prime Minister is contrasting stability with chaos on the other side. The Modi ki guarantee is more interesting because he's almost invoking identifying his personality with the popular will of the people, and almost referring to himself in the third person. Ye Modi ki guarantee hai. That Prime Minister Modi, coming from a poor background, now rising to the top job, understands what it means to come out of poverty, and thereby understands the hopes and aspirations of the people. So he's tapping into his personal sense of belief, his self-belief, and trying to convey to the people of the country that, look, as long as I am there, you're secure. So it is really completely conflating his personality with the will of the people. And that's been his politics as a nationalist populist leader. And since it's worked twice before, but in 2014 and 19, he hopes to complete a hat-trick. The interview comes across, if I may say so in conclusion, as someone who's almost very, very self-confident. I wouldn't say overconfident, but someone who's self-confident that 2024, in his view, is almost a done deal.
Okay, very interesting how the Prime Minister says don't look for a dictionary meaning of guarantee. It's about the trust from the poor. And he says that a couple of times to reinforce that notion. Ashok Malik, partner with the Asia Group, is also with us. Ashok, welcome. We'll be going to our other guests as well in just a moment. Your reading of the Prime Minister's fleshing out of this Modi ki guarantee slogan going into 2024, Ashok, where he says, this kind of a guarantee can only really come from someone who's risen from the ground up.
So if you read the interview, which I've read in detail, it's a very good interview, he talks about listening to policy specialists and civil servants and advisors, but also mixing their advice with his own bottom-up experience as a political activist, as a political worker, as somebody who's been in public life and traveled across the country in various roles for 50 or 60 years now. And it's that magic of that chemistry that actually drives his policy making. That's what he attributes it to. Now, this is a gift. This is a gift that is rare. And that is really the key to the guarantee. He talks about it being a commitment and a trust to his voter. But he's not asking voters to just vote for him because he's nationalist or populist or identifies with the nation. He's asking people to vote for him because of the strength of his achievements over the past 10 years. And he talks about that in detail. The most telling number is the inflation number between the 10 years of the UPA government and the 10 years of the NDA government. The inflation number is 5.1% for the NDA government, which is half of what it was for the UPA government. And both governments faced international challenges and commodity price challenges. And yet, this government has managed inflation better. And he's obviously proud of that. He also talked.
Ashok, we've lost your audio. I'll just try and patch that back in. But, Ashok, I think we have you back. Can you finish your point?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he also talks about the risk of a coalition government, the risk of a Milijuli Sarkar, where the Prime Minister's writ does not run even to his ministers.
Yeah.
So when he talks about his strong personality and his absolute clarity, it's not just because he's talking up himself. It's also because in a time of such upheaval at home, upheaval internationally, upheaval in the economy, upheaval in geopolitics, you need a strong leader.
Very, very interesting.
That's what he offers himself.
Absolutely. And, if you read this entire interview, and over the next few minutes, I'm going to be reading the rest of the interview out to all of our viewers, I can tell you that there is a sense, and I agree with Ashok, that, not a word is wasted. Each and every word is weighed to carry a certain amount of significance beyond, what's just there in that sentence. Now, let me go to part 2, and I'll bring in all our other guests. Siddharth Zarabi, Sanjay Jha, and others will also be joining us. They're both with us. We're getting more people. Raj Chengappa also, who was part of this interview panel, will be with us as well live. Now let's go to the second, part 2 of what the Prime Minister said in this interview to India Today. We asked him, how is the BJP different from these so-called Parivarvadi parties? The reason why this question was asked is because the Prime Minister was asked about how there is this trend of changing leaders every now and then. And the Prime Minister, interestingly, took his own example to say that the BJP is not like these Parivarvadi parties. Answering the question, here's what the Prime Minister said in the interview, and I quote, "Parivarvadi parties find this democratic churn difficult. The BJP has the ability to nurture multiple generations of leadership at the same time. Look at the presidents of the BJP and you will see fresh faces every few years. Ours is a cadre-based party driven by a clear mission. We all began as grassroots workers and rose through the ranks on the back of dedication and hard work. This commitment is why the nation, especially the youth, feels a strong connection with the BJP. In a democracy, it is essential to provide opportunities to new generations and new blood. This democratic churn is what makes democracies vibrant. This churn is also what makes our party vibrant and keeps aspirations and hopes burning within our Karyakartas. They feel that they too can rise in the party through their hard work. Our party is used to doing different experiments. In Gujarat, we opted for all fresh faces in ministries. In Delhi, we opted for all fresh faces in local corporation elections." Unquote. Raj Chengappa, Group Editorial Director for Publishing, who conducted this interview, along with Arun Puri and Kali Puri, is also live with us. Raj, welcome to our coverage, and I'll be going to our other guests for a word on this as well. It's interesting, Raj, how the Parivarvad word was used by the Prime Minister in response to your question about the trend of, constantly changing faces, new faces. In the recent Heartland elections, that was also, one of the things that was there. And the Prime Minister, very interestingly, took his own example. He said, look at what happened in 2001, 2002 in Gujarat. There as well, here, I was made the Chief Minister without any prior administrative experience. So this has been a legacy of the BJP. And the Prime Minister himself, Raj, brings in the word Parivarvad, and that, leads to the next question you asked. Very interesting.
Shiv, I think what he's done in some senses in this interview is laid the grounds for the battle for 2024.
Yeah.
It's very clear. And he told us it's performance, which means his performance versus Parivarvad. I mean, that was the words he used. And then went on to talk about how Milijuli, he wasn't directly referring to the India alliance, he's very careful about that, but in general talked about these 30 years of instability that for what he calls these Milijuli parties had done. And then talks of the fact that the nation is looking for stability and growth, and he is the person that was going to do it. But I think what's very interesting about this interview, Shiv, if I may add, is that what he does in this interview is, I've talked to him earlier, and so has Arun and Kali. and also, when he was just 1 year in the business as Prime Minister. And what the difference I found was that he was willing to talk about how his mind works, how he takes decisions.
Yes, we'll be coming to that in a moment, in fact.
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah. No, I'll come to that because I want to flesh this out so that, we're moving in sequence, Raj. So just bear with me. We'll be coming to that bit also. The Parivarvad issue also, I wanted to flesh out a little bit more and get Rajdeep and Sanjay in on this. Rajdeep, the Parivarvad issue is something, we've seen used plentifully. It's not a new barb that has been used by the BJP or the Prime Minister to attack the opposition. How do you see it in the current context just weeks before the next election?
Shiv, the template the Prime Minister has set is more or less identical over the last few years. If you look at it, Majboor Sarkar versus what he says is a Majboot Sarkar. A strong government versus coalition governments. He uses the word Mili Juli here. You've seen his claim of Modi ki guarantee, trying to get people to vote for the Prime Minister, not necessarily the BJP, but have trust in the Prime Minister when he makes a commitment. And the same with Parivarvad. What is he doing? He's essentially contrasting his claim that he and his party represent, he believes, a certain meritocracy versus his rivals, especially in the India Alliance, many regional parties, as well as the Congress party, his principal adversary, which he wants to suggest are family courts. So this has been the template the Prime Minister has set over the last decade. And he's simply following that on, primarily because I don't think the opposition has been able to offer an alternative narrative which is compelling enough. Because they've not been able to offer that alternative narrative, the Prime Minister knows he's sticking to his game. This has been his game plan. The others have to now find something new to disrupt the Prime Minister's game plan. And because they've not been able to do that successfully enough yet, he is someone who is sticking to the very template that enabled him to achieve success in 2019. He mentioned Parivarvad then. He's mentioning it now again.
Sanjay, do you want to, add something to that? The Parivarvad attack is not new. And the fact that the Prime Minister still uses it in his interviews and speeches and rallies suggests that there's been no effective counter to that. We've seen the opposition, the Congress especially, try and say, look who's talking, the BJP has its own dynasties, etc., etc. But that has never really found any traction or credibility in the same way that it does when the Prime Minister points a finger at the Congress party and says, Parivarvad.
Shiv, you have a point there. I think the opposition has not been able to actually give a rejoinder, especially when Mr. Modi's party actually has Maneka Gandhi and Varun Gandhi, two famous Gandhis who are part of the BJP. So, and if you have the long list of people from Piyush Goyal down to Devendra Fadnavis, etc., there are more dynastic leaders today in the BJP than the Congress. But you're absolutely right. This point needs to be articulated. But I have a couple of short points here to make. If Mr. Modi is indeed, uttering, these lovely platitudes to your newspaper, why isn't he holding a press conference? Why, for example, would he hesitate from addressing the media and the public at large? Why isn't this interview, or where we are talking about his quotes, playing out on the camera on India Today?
No, but we've asked him every question in this interview, as you will see.
Yeah. So let me make a few points. I think it lacks credibility to a great extent. And, his guarantee, whatever, I think these are standard trope. Anyone with a discerning eye will know that, frankly speaking, he said nothing new at all. But there are 2 points I wish to make, because I heard, Ashok say about growth. Do people know that in the last 4 years, or rather 5 years since 2019, India's GDP has been just 3.5%. That is India's GDP. And therefore, the logic why the opposition keeps talking about, and this government runs away from it, on unemployment, on food inflation in particular, on the farmer distress. Look at the 4 factors that Narendra Modi talked about as his big quote, right? My forecasts are poverty. Do you know the number of people below poverty line today? At a very conservative estimate, it's around 250 million.
Okay.
Farmers, he talked about farmers. We saw what the farmers went through for a 1-year-long strike and what were the consequences of that. He talks of youth. Look at the unemployment there. And he talks of women. Look at Sakshi Malik episode to look at how we treat women in this country and how Mr. Modi has protected his own BJP leader. So I think let's cut out this, shibboleths and slogans. Bottom line, I believe this has been a dark decade. I hope the people of India are able to see through it. But I'll agree with you. It's up to the Congress and the India Alliance to be able to change the narrative.
Okay.
If they do, I still think we have a story in 2024.
Ashok, you want to come in? You want to say something on that?
Look, two things here. One, I've spoken about inflation, not growth, but I take the larger point that has been made, and I'd like to answer that. I think this has been, especially the past 4 years, have been a very, very challenging period for the global economy, not just the Indian economy, the global economy. Every budget that Mr. Modi's second government has come up with has to be reworked because of global challenges. The COVID pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine war, the lockdown, the geopolitical impact of the China-US breakdown. A number of issues have come up, and now, of course, the Middle Eastern war. So every single budget almost has had to be reworked and relooked at. And yet, through this period, I think food inflation has been managed fairly well. I'm not suggesting it's been perfect, but it's been managed fairly well. His record on inflation is better than the UPA's, with due respects. And in terms of growth, in terms of restructuring the economy, believe me, I work with business now, and I'm hearing and seeing more interest in manufacturing now than previously.
Okay. And
this is not to say previous governments did not try, and this is not to say it's all been done and everything has been achieved. It's a long, multi-year, multi-decade process to make India a manufacturing economy. But you're seeing the beginnings of that now. If you look at infrastructure and logistics, the improvement in the past 10 years is astounding. And that is a building block to a deeper manufacturing economy going ahead.
I'm glad we're talking about economy. I will come to you, Sanjay. I saw your finger noted. I'll come to you just after the next couple of questions. Glad we're talking about the economy because the next batch of questions that Raj, Mr. Puri and Kali asked the Prime Minister were on the issue of economy and the challenges facing the country. The Prime Minister said in the interview that during this year, we've seen many successes as well as challenges. He was asked what exactly these challenges were to articulate them, to which the Prime Minister's reply was, and I quote, India's rapid ascent in 2023 has been very important as it sets the tone in our journey to Viksit Bharat. We've unleashed the latent potential of our nation on global forums. India's presence and contributions are now sought after. From a country that used to feel left behind, we have become a country that is now leading from the front. From a country that used to seek a voice on various platforms, we've become a country that leads and creates new global platforms. Today, the world consensus is clear. This is India's moment. This led to our next question to the Prime Minister. How are you, the Prime Minister, ensuring that India becomes a $5 trillion economy and the world's third largest? Remember, the $5 trillion economy is a promise that the Prime Minister and the BJP government have made. Here is the Prime Minister's answer. And I quote, our track record speaks for itself. When I became Chief Minister of Gujarat in 2001, the size of its economy was around $26 billion. When I left Gujarat to become the Prime Minister, the size of Gujarat's economy had become $133.5 billion. And as a result of the various policies and reforms, today Gujarat's economy is around $260 billion. Similarly, when I became Prime Minister in 2014, the size of India's economy was $2 trillion. And at the end of 2023-24, India's GDP will be more than $3.75 trillion. It is this track record of 23 years which shows this is a realistic target. Raj, I want to come to you on this because the $5 trillion economy has become a very, very sticky catchphrase. We've seen, quite a bit of heat in the media recently, over whether this can happen, it won't happen. There have been empirical counters. There have been those who've said it can definitely happen given India's track record over the past couple of years. This is something which is quantifiable. It's not just a promise, it's an actual arithmetic number to which the government can actually be held to. But the Prime Minister is sticking with it, Raj.
I think he took two tracks. One, of course, he kept to his commitment that he would fulfill it, and sort of told us that his past record shows that he has kept his word on these kind of issues. Very interestingly, you had mentioned Viksit Bharat, and I think in the interview he went really in depth into what he thinks of Viksit Bharat, and he told us that look, it is not about per capita income. That you say, if you look at the common definition of what a developed country is, they talk of per capita income being about $20,000 or so, around $2,000 to have a world-class infrastructure, as well as to have a society that is governed by democracy. These are 3 or 4 of the attributes. His point was that, look, there are over 100 characteristics that you need to talk about when you look at what a developed country would be like. And he went a little more into that, and he said there are 3 or 4 things I'd like to do in the next couple of years. Before I get into that detail, talked very interestingly of the fact that between 1922 and 1947, there was an Indian generation in India that aspired for freedom. And in that aspiration, they fulfilled that thing. He now sees a period between 2023 and 2047 where there's a whole new generation that aspires to be a developed country.
Yes.
And therefore, his faith is that this is this generation that is going to change that, has the will and the power to do it.
Very interesting.
And then he talks about three things that he would like to do in this Viksit Bharat process. One is he looks at skill development, and he brings in the new education policy to say that he's changing the way that, this is a problem-solving generation. The second thing he says is that he would like to encourage medium-sized and small businesses and make them grow into larger enterprises, and therefore build the foundation of this 2047 development. And the third aspect he identifies is that the financial markets, he says investment is key to it, and there has to be a restructuring of it. So it is not a kind of a woolly notion that he talks about Viksit Bharat. I think for the first time he actually elaborates. Let's also be clear, Shiv, even as we speak, the Niti Aayog has been, and which we mentioned in our article, is working on a blueprint for Viksit Bharat. There are 10 secretarial groups that have been formed.
Okay.
And they have, brainstormed for the last 3 or 4 months. And that proposal, I am told, is going to be put on the new year to the Prime Minister.
Okay.
So he is giving flesh and bones to what, he's talked about in the last couple of months.
Okay, very, very interesting. So not woolly, definitely a lot of flesh and bone, a lot of structure to what is going on. Siddharth Zarabi, Managing Editor, Business Today, also with us. Siddharth, this is something you've been looking at, ever since that whole $5 trillion economy declaration kind of exploded upon the political landscape. How are you seeing the mood right now as far as that promise is concerned and what the Prime Minister has just said?
Well, very clearly, the Prime Minister in his interview has given us a glimpse not only into his 2024 agenda, which is election year, but a broader 5-year blueprint. And it's very interesting, the kind of economic roadmap, and that's the bulk of crux of his argument really, is evolving around 2 or 3 pillars. One, sustained economic growth, GDP growth, and a very clear-cut statement that there will continue to be reforms, because a lot of the times this government is asked about reforms as they were understood earlier, and he very clearly says preparing India's financial sector and capital markets and the regulatory framework. So if you look at some of these key points, the second part very clearly is the continuing focus on the small and medium enterprises. Raj referred to that. And third, most importantly, Shiv, is a clear indication that infrastructure will continue to drive growth and answer critics like Sanjay Jha. Okay,
very interesting. And I'll get Sanjay Jha in on this because
I would like to respond to that.
We're taking, I'm just coming to you, Sanjay, because the next question that was asked to the Prime Minister brings it down to that issue that you and Ashok were just talking about, which is inflation and jobs. So let me just put that out and then I'm coming straight to you. Now, the next question, the opposition says, experts say that inflation and lack of jobs is hurting the poor. What would you say to these critics is the question that was put to the Prime Minister, to which his response to India Today was, and I quote, "Let's put allegations aside and discuss the facts. Despite 2 years of a once-in-a-century pandemic, and global conflicts disrupting global value chains and even causing recessionary pressures across the world, India has shown remarkable resilience. Despite heavy odds, global crises, supply chain breakdowns, and geopolitical tensions impacting global prices of basic items, average inflation from 2014-2015 to 2023-24 till November was only 5.1% compared to 8.2% during the previous 10 years, that is 2004 to 2014. Which is higher, inflation of 5.1% or 8.2% is what the Prime Minister says. Let's just decode that for a moment, because this is the this is the very emotive issue of inflation, price rise, and job creation. Sanjay, I want to quickly come to you on that because you had your finger raised. Let's get a first word from you.